Okay, good morning people. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning, Hikairo.
Okay, today's topic is going to be rough and raw, and it's about checking your shoes. Maybe I should start, Catherine, with a little song I made up.
Okay.
So, okay, you put your left foot in, you put your right foot in, you put your left foot in, you shake it all about, you feel a bitey whitey, and you know something's wrong. And that's what it's all about. What is it all about, Catherine?
Yes, well, this week Hikairo had a bit of an exciting week because he put his foot into his gardening shoe and there was a surprise.
There was a surprise. What sort of surprise, Catherine?
What did you call it in the song? A bitey whitey.
Yeah, it's a red, black, bitey whitey.
Red back spider.
That's right. So I got bitten by a red back spider. And it was on a Sunday. It should have been a day of rest, but what was I doing, Catherine?
You were supposed to be doing gardening. You didn't get much done.
I did. I finished. But lo and behold, I felt something strange. So I went to check my shoes after. I've never checked my shoes before. 15 years in Australia, and I haven't checked my shoes once. And on this occasion, I felt a little bite, so I thought, I'm just out of curiosity this time. I picked up my shoe, had a look inside, and I saw a little web. So that fascinated me. So I had rubber gloves on. I got my finger, put it in, squeezed up and pulled the web out, and there it was, a big, fat, round, ugly black one. So I popped it and squeezed it, and that's when the story began. So Catherine, tell them what happened to me. Oh, it was bloody fortunate.
So basically, he said, I went down to the garage and he was sitting there and he says, I've been bitten by a spider, and so I just administered first aid.
Ooh, ooh.
And then he had to watch the rugby.
Oh, that's right. I had to watch the rugby.
Yeah, so we were watching, and I was just checking on him and making sure
Let
that
me
he was
say,
okay.
it was Aotearoa rugby, not Australian rugby. Thank you, Catherine.
And but he straight away felt pain in his groin, which was not normal. So he just felt uncomfortable, and then he was so I'd already given him like antihistamines, already done that rest ice, elevation, and just making sure that he was resting. But then he still was feeling uncomfortable, but we just didn't know what was happening, so we rang the doctor, and the doctor just said, look, straight away go down to the hospital.
So we went to the hospital. Now, let me just cover the whole story, and we'll get to the learnings. So we went to the hospital 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon, and we arrived home at just after 4 a.m. So we were in total 11 hours at the hospital. The key thing was they couldn't get my blood pressure down. It was what was my blood?
It got up to 218.
There you go. I was on fire, and they couldn't bring the fire down. So anyway, they had me on painkillers, and then so it was a long night, and we got home, and it's only been today, so it's a week, just about a week later, and we're out, obviously doing this little put your toes in. So and now I'm feeling a lot better. So it's a week where Catherine had to look after me, because basically, just tell them briefly the symptoms I had for the last week.
Yeah, so probably within the first, say, 8 hours, like apart from being really uncomfortable, he had like localized sweating. So he was bitten twice, I think, on his big toe, and so the bottom part of his shin was boiling hot or freezing cold. And then it was just sort of travelling, that was sort of travelling through his body, but then he was in excruciating pain in his joints, and then also profusely sweating. So we were 4.5 hours, I think, in the emergency department of the hospital where we were, but they were fantastic. They kept checking on us because he was just so uncomfortable and couldn't get comfortable, and people could see, like, he looked like he might have been going through the DTs of, getting off drugs or something, but people could see that he was actually a really calm person. And then a couple of times when people were really staring at him, especially when there was young teenagers around, I just said, this is what happens when you don't check your shoes.
There you go, that's a lesson. Check your shoes. So the learnings we take from this, Catherine, tell them a couple. That's the first one.
Check your shoes.
Obviously check your shoes, and yeah, I think for me the important thing is, you know, you come to Australia 15 years and I never checked my shoes, and so you just begin to take what is a simple thing for granted, but it has a big adverse effect. It took me out for a week, so no work. I mean, Catherine had to give up her work for the week to be at home to look after me, and then the inconvenience of I think one day 20 towels as a consequence of it.
It was 6
sweating.
loads of washing.
One day. There you go, Sharon. Take that, Sharon. My sister, she loves washing. That's a normal day for her, but not for us. So yeah, so that lesson.
And I'll just add that he had on, like, say, shorts and a t-shirt when he was in bed, but he had a towel shoved up the front, a towel shoved up the back, or wrapped around his middle section. Towels everywhere, towels wrapped around his head, towel on the bed, towel over the top, just to try and soak up all the sweat. So it was, lots of hydrolyte, which was good.
Yeah, so
and they don't do anti-venom anymore, because they found there was other reactions, and so it was actually, he had to go through the pain.
Hardcore, it's like a detox. I had to detox basically.
Yeah.
And so it took 5 days to flush it all out, all the toxins. And the last couple of days, it was hard for me to sleep, because during the night hours I'm waking up every half hour. I've broken the world record for the number of showers. I was thinking I was having about 20 showers a day, because every half hour I'd be that wet I needed to go and shower and just freshen up. And so so I'm a pretty clean guy. I've done my year's worth in a week.
But we thank God that he didn't actually have a fever, even though he was sweating and shaking the whole time, and barely able to walk, because he also ended up with gout symptoms as well, because it
Praise God. What do you reckon, people?
And
can you be grateful in all these situations? What do you reckon? How do you think I coped, Catherine?
prayer, praise and worship, and you had someone looking after you.
Okay, so as a student, or as what was I? I was not the victim, but I was the one who was crook. You know, with all these symptoms, I think I was. Things could be worse, you know. But yeah. So let's probably some of the learnings. What do you think some of the learnings are? Like I said, one of the key ones is, you know, like, I mean, there's principles that are put in place so that if you abide by them, then you're not going to get yourself into stupid situations like I did. And that principle was a simple one of just simply looking in your shoes and checking. And because I didn't do that, like I said, I was out for a week, Catherine was out for a week, you know, it impacted on my clients, so it has a role of effect on others. But having said that, then it's the process of how you manage this whole thing. And you know, we know that our God is a healer, and obviously that's what we did. And I think one of the key things for me on the initial days was, you know, like, how can you rejoice in the Lord when you're in a heap of pain and you're sitting out there amongst a whole group of people who are, you know, they're there for the same reasons too. They've got an emergency. And how do you keep your cool, your composure? Because I was in pain, you know, and somehow maintain like a sense of integrity or just a calm, you know, because it was a stormy, you know, it was a stormy week in a lot of ways. But somehow, you know, like the God of the overcoming God, He is always there, and we don't see Him when we're in those times of pressure, stress, or, you know, like high stressful, painful, you know, situations like this one was. And so it's somehow been able to find the joy. And so for me, it was just a couple of things. One, just speaking the name of the Lord and speaking in tongues, and just trying to find a voice to be able to worship Him. And the answer certainly didn't come overnight. It's been a week, but I just knew, you know, I just had to press in, and, you know, for me, so that's a key thing, pressing in.
And practical applications as well. So for example, and we're so grateful, initially there was another 3 people praying, one from New Zealand, one from the Gold Coast, and one from up Tamborine Mountain. So that was just amazing to have that support, and especially you know, the first night in the hospital, because we were there from 4 o'clock and one of those people actually was, you know, online and just doing decrees and things and sending them through. I think she was on till like 12:30 at, you know, on that night.
Oh,
So
excuse
it's just
me.
amazing. So just thank you. And then, you know, over the next couple of days we had some other people coming on board praying, that as we sort of shared what had been and what was still happening. But also this one actually wanted to get rid of the first aid book only 2 weeks ago, and I said
Oh.
no, like because
Catherine, did I?
even though I haven't always maintained the currency of my senior first aid, I've usually had it. So sometimes it might have lapsed for a year or two in between, but I had the most recent first aid book, and so just making sure that we, you know, that we had everything, that we had ice, that we had, you know, so actually just administering first aid, and also just making sure that, you know, even if he wasn't thirsty, just nagging him, making sure he's drinking, making sure he's having his hydrolyte to replenish fluids, making sure finding food that he would eat. So again, practical. So it's not just spiritual and pressing into God and preventing things like checking issues, but it's also when things happen that you're practically going about, okay, what is the best advice at the moment, and following that. So just your practical first aid.
Thank you, Kat. Well, one final thought before we end this little table talk, Catherine. What's one final word you'd like to say?
God is good.
God is, there you go. God is good. I would like to say, look at my left foot. I can wiggle it around, and my right foot, I can wiggle it around. I can wiggle both of them, because God is good, and He is a healer. Like Catherine said, there's practical and there's spiritual things, and it's finding the balance in life, and that's what we're endeavouring to do. We want to live a life that's whole and complete. We can only do that if we keep things in balance and make God central. This is Hikai Row
And Catherine.
signing off.
And we are sitting at the white table. So
There you are, Kat.
this
We're
is
at the
called
white
Table Talk, for those
table
of you who
talk.
haven't seen us before, and it's part of our F7 Building Blocks to Freedom series.
Thank you, Catherine. See, we don't have